Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's live debate. I am Tiffanie Darke, and we are here to discuss a radical new approach to business, science, and the economy. First up, we're going to be here talking for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to be taking questions from the audience. So please feel free to tap your questions into the chat box, and I will put them to our distinguished panel. Now, as one of our panel and our guest this morning says, Phillip Ullmann, our institutions and systems are broken. Society must radically rethink and reset from the ground up. So that is that's the set out this morning. On our panel, we have Lord Glasman Morris, who is a political theorist, a Labour peer, and the founder of the Blue Labour movement. He has advised many Labour leaders and governments, including Ed Miliband, and describes himself as a radical traditionalist. Danny Kruger, Conservative MP for Devizes. He is the co-chair of the new Social Covenant Unit and most recently worked as political secretary to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister. And finally, Phillip Ullmann, social entrepreneur and businessman who built the recruitment company Cordant to £1 billion turnover before turning it into a social enterprise. So my first question is to Morris. Is the system really broken, and what's the solution?
Well, the system is partially broken, I think. I think the covenantal aspects of the system, I think the monarchy is in good shape, for example. I think that our system of common law, I don't think anybody's disputing the authority of Parliament. So the inherited aspects are fine. But the problem lies really with the economy, which is entirely contractual. So you have huge inequality, you have extraction from the economy, you have the abandonment of the faraway places. So there's a huge problem with our economy and the way that it functions. And then that contractual thinking affects education, affects the NHS. So the market is kind of colonizing all the aspects of our inherited institutions, and that undermines those institutions. So there's a huge and fundamental problem with the way that we live and our notions of efficiency.
So you mentioned the word covenant there. Essentially, what are you saying is that our constitutional framework is good, but the system that is within it is broken?
Yeah, and it's constantly being undermined by individualism, by calculations of career and all those things. So there's a breakdown of a we going on. And I do think that there was an outburst of, well, I mean, when, for example, the Queen died, you could sense the sense of grace, a sense of common life in our country. But that immediately is undermined by the relentless pressure of really capitalism and the way that it motivates people to just think about themselves.
Okay, thank you. So Danny, you head up an organisation, the new Social Covenant Unit. How does that marry up to what Morris is saying?
Well, I'm in agreement with Morris and with Phillip, and we're here because we're broadly on the same page. No doubt there'll be differences, but I want to just honour the point that Morris made. I mean, the constitution of this country, which is ancient, is built on an idea of the human person as being essentially related, part of a set of institutions, and related to the past as well as the future through those institutions. And I agree with Morris that we have a set of institutions in this country which are sound and enduring, but it is our job in every generation to maintain them and to ensure that they are sustained into the future. And I think our institutions are under threat at the moment because of the cultural and economic forces that Morris describes. What the new Social Covenant Unit is about is it's chaired by myself and a fellow Conservative MP. So we come from the Conservative tradition, but we're not party political explicitly, and working in happy partnership with Morris, and Phillip is not party aligned at all, on a whole range of ideas actually. But what we are committed to, and the framework that we set ourselves, is that we think that the purpose of politics is to cultivate the conditions of virtue. So what politics is about is making the institutions and the values, the conditions, the social conditions that make better people. Because ultimately we can't have systems so perfect that nobody needs to be good. We need to be good people. And how do we create good people? Well, we have good, strong social institutions imbued with good values. And the institutions that we are committed to strengthening are very simple and straightforward, and they are the covenantal institutions. We'll get onto what that means, I hope. They are the family, the community, and the nation.
In that order?
Well, it's a good question about what order you start in, actually. and actually the origin of the covenantal principle, which is a biblical one, actually starts with the nation before proceeding to the family and to the individual. But in a sense, from a personal point of view, what matters most to us is our families, and I think that is the essential building block of society. And our obligation in politics and in civil life is to strengthen families. They need to be themselves part of a successful and strong community. A family on its own, a nuclear family in a semi-detached house that doesn't know its neighbours is not a strong family. Goes nuclear. That's right, and breaks apart. So families need to be part of a set of relationships, and communities themselves, neighbourhoods, interest groups, need to inhabit a nation too. And a nation, of course, needs to be part of a set of relationships that are beyond it as well. But I would suggest, and I think fellow Brexiteer Morris would agree, the nation is essentially sovereign. And we don't want higher political sovereignty than that. But even the nation is a related institution, needs to be part of a community of nations.
Yeah. Philip, as the man behind Covenant Advisory, you describe yourself as chief energizer there. What does that actually mean?
So what it means is that I try to create the environment where others thrive, and change in general requires energy. And I'd like to be the source of some of that energy. Just continuing on what both Morris and Denny have said, it may look bleak at the moment in this country, but I recognise that it is fundamentally covenantal, the UK, and it led the way in the Industrial Revolution because it was an island, because it was separate, and because it's covenantal. And I believe it can lead the way again through the covenantal revolution. So for me, it's exciting times.
Can you just define covenantal? Because I think we haven't quite described what that is.
So by covenant, as Danny says, it's about relationships. We tend to build society around contract, which is actually competitive, where we're actually destroying relationships. We have to start building relationships, and that's a completely different approach. Family, community, society, it's all about building those relationships. And what we need to do is revisit the whole system and start to redesign it around laws that actually build relationships and don't actually destroy them.
Is this the conversation around responsibilities over rights? Morris, is that something you
Yeah, just to go into this covenantal thing, I mean, I kind of view it as the 3 I's. So the first is intergenerational. You don't make it up. It's not your own individual creation. You inherit obligations. So we inherit law and parliament. We inherit a monarchy. We inherit a democratic system. We don't choose what family we're in. It's an inheritance. I would add to Danny's thing that there's an important element of honouring faith in all of this. So the second is this idea of inheritance, that you've got to cherish and nurture and renew your inheritance in each generation. I think that's essential to covenant. And the third thing is the institutions. Institutions are... So covenant is really opposed to just this individualism, self-expression, self-emancipation as the ultimate goal, which I would identify with liberalism. Covenant says there's also, we're social beings, and if we cherish and nurture and renew our inheritance in each generation, then that leads to virtue, to a conception of the good.
Yeah, and I mean, adding to that, I think a simple way of distinguishing between a covenant, which we believe is the proper foundation of a social order, and the contract, which has to a certain degree replaced it, is with the contract, it's between two individuals who are free to walk away. And the deal is that I make a contract with you. We each make a commitment to fulfill on our part, and if you break your side of it, then I'm therefore liberated from the contract and I can walk away. Whereas with a covenant, no matter what you do, my commitment remains. So as in a family, if you are my child, there's nothing you can do that can break my love for you. You can renounce me, you can walk away from the family, you can betray me, disgrace me, let me down, but my commitment to you remains. And the same way as your commitment to your country and indeed to your community, even though you can leave these things physically and you can detach and ultimately you're not trapped in these relationships, but there is an obligation that is essential and really eternal in them. And I think we need to recover these ideas of covenantal, unconditional, enduring relationships as the basis of a safe and sound society. And I mean, just an example, a key one is marriage itself. So in a marriage, you promise at the beginning of your marriage, no matter what the other person does, you're going to be with them unconditionally. Obviously, in practice, we often do end up breaking that arrangement. And divorce is legal and rightly so. But what you're trying to do at the outset of a marriage is to make an enduring commitment, and no matter what the other one does, you should stick with it. And I regret, and I think one of the problems in our society is that we have reduced marriage back to a contract. It's like, what am I getting out of this relationship? If I'm not getting enough out of it, I'm off, which is like just a kind of normal boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, really. And marriage should be different, and I regret that we've reduced marriage, and it's a good sort of example of what I think we're doing in our society as a whole, is reducing covenantal relationships to contractual ones.
Just to add to that, which I think will help define it. So there are circumstances where marriages end, but that doesn't stop your obligation to your partner, to your children. That does not cease. So the contractual aspect may dissolve, but the covenantal aspect and the idea that your marriage breaks up and then you abandon your partner, your wife, your children, is anathema to this. Obligations remain through time, irrespective of the contractual aspects.
Yeah.
Interesting. If you again continue with the marriage analogy, if you're going out with somebody and at the end of the date you say, look, thank you very much, that was wonderful, that was 2 hours, your charge rate is £100, that will be £200, he or she isn't going to like it. If you say, look, that was good, I'm going to book you on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, forcing it by power, that's not going to go down well. It's about a social relationship, and effectively don't force it with money or force it with power, but actually use influence with social relationships. And that's the difference with a covenant. You're not enforcing it with power. It's got to be a loving relationship.
That's the paradox, Philip, is the covenant involves freely giving. It's a freely entered
Danny
into.
mentioned the word virtue earlier,
Completely.
which is not a word that you hear very often these days.
Well, our notion of virtue is not just to do with people associated just with sex. Virtue is good doing, fulfilling, being able to do your work well. So under the degradation of work, the contractualization of work is a disgrace as far as we're concerned. So notions of apprenticeship, notions of a calling, I think are very important.
So the virtues are what human beings are good at. It's what we're made for, and it's what give us pleasure, but it's also what make us effective in the world. And what we should be creating is an economy and a society in which people can be virtuous, which doesn't mean just being well behaved in personal relations, although it does mean that. It means being able to fulfill your natural skills and the attributes that you've got. And then everyone's got different skills and attributes, but that should be our mission, is to make people good.
It's good doing rather than do gooding.
But I don't think anybody would disagree with this. This is all about us being good humans. The issue is, how do we practically apply this in real life? Philip?
Yeah, again, the Bible's a good example here, because if you look carefully at the way the law is crafted, the laws of damages, of actually harming others, are in the form of case law. But the virtue that Danny talks about, that's never takes the form of case law, it's a principle.
So this is a legally enforced framework you're talking about?
Correct. So what we're saying is, for the virtue, don't force it by the law, but it has to be within the law. There's got to be a framework. The principles have to be there so that people have a basic framework that they're working to, but it's got to be by education, by relationship building, not by, I'm going to take you to court because you're not giving money to charity, which is a crazy idea.
Yeah. So, Danny, is this a little bit about what the Tories are proposing with the regional mayors and the assemblies? This is a step towards that.
Well, I'm a localist, so I do, although I believe in the nation very strongly and in the importance of the state, I also think that we have an over-centralised state in the UK particularly, and too much power is hoarded in Whitehall and Westminster, and we do need to get back to the idea of civil society being empowered, and local government particularly, and we need locally elected leaders who genuinely represent their communities. So yes, we need a politics that gets power closer to the people that it affects, and we need, as citizens, to step up into our responsibilities. We should not be passive kind of recipients of the democracy that is managed elsewhere that we just vote for every 4 years. We as citizens need to be taking responsibility. So I think there is a big political dimension to this. I mean, I think the challenge is a good one to Philip because he's in the world of business. How do we have a covenantal economy because the contract is so straightforward. You can go to law. You've written down what you're going to each do. With a covenant, a relationship, a kind of more kind of family style arrangement, how do you manage the competing interests of strangers?
Well, as poacher turned gamekeeper, Philip, someone who's turned a business into a social enterprise, how would you answer that?
Well, I've had a lot of experience of this. I tried to do it, and it's hard because at Cordant there were hundreds of thousands of relationships. We employed 100,000 people a year. It was a big organisation, and I couldn't convert it because there were too many contractual relationships. So the answer is you have to start sometimes again with it, but based on building relationships. So what I would do would be to actually legislate, put in the books that the obligation that we all have to each other. That's nowhere there. It's not just about me, it's about looking after others. And then Maurice and I have been working on the concept of a civic trust, which is a practical alternative to the company, based on the Bible again. And by the way, if I'm talking about the Bible too often, please don't disconnect, because you may actually be surprised by the ancient ideas which are totally applicable today. So,
What is a civic trust?
Civic trust. Maurice, you want to explain it? You go first. Okay, civic trust. The two words are key. Trust, we have no trust. We don't trust anybody because in relationships of force, and you don't trust people because you're either forced by the state or you're forced by money. So trust is just that. It's about people voluntarily agreeing to operate together as trustees. I think that's a key concept. That means that I'm not the owner in the sense that I'm the only beneficiary for the assets that God has blessed me with, but I have to look after my family and the community, but also the wider society. So people can trust me because I'm not only interested in myself, I'm interested in everybody. And the civic bit, as both have mentioned, is local. We have to let go. That's key. And the state doesn't let go. It's too controlling. And the market doesn't let go. You have to give people the space, the soul space to flourish, and we don't do it. So effectively, this is really practical. Civic trust is not a hypothetical idea. It's a real idea. Go on.
And Tiffanie, just to clarify, so the crisis we're in is that the two big models of the last 80 years, so we had our 1945 Labour government, which was a big deal, which was based on nationalisation. And then that reached a breakdown in the late 70s, and then we had the Thatcher era with privatisation. And what you can see with the energy crisis is that privatised energy just leads to price gouging, profiteering, a lack of control over price. This whole cost of living crisis is not that. It's a crisis of this system where private gains, Andy Haldane talked about the doom loop. He said, it's the nationalisation of loss and the privatisation of gain. We saw that in the financial crash. And what the civic trusts are is a solution to that. It says that there's, so for water, electricity, gas, neither nationalisation nor privatisation, but local assemblies having control over those assets.
So they have ownership.
And that links up. Well, there's civic ownership. So the reason I'm reluctant with the public is it leads easily to a collective state level. Mm-hmm. So, for example, in Bolton, in Barnsley, in Grimsby, anywhere, London would have to be more decentralised because it's so big. Local people have control through their assemblies over these companies. They hold them accountable. And those companies provide the necessary things for living.
So Maurice has mentioned the issue with energy. I think it's a good example to show how covenantal thinking is completely different. You get completely different results. And I'm just reminded of Jules is here. Jules formerly worked at the BBC. He told me that a couple of years ago, 15 professors wrote to the BBC complaining about the fact that the metaphors that they're using to describe taxation, the economy, are actually wrong. We talk about it as a family budget, and it's max on the credit cards, and it's mortgage. It's the big cause of the problems. Is the narrative is simply wrong. It's not a household budget, and its purpose is not the same as a household budget. Its purpose is to ensure that everybody within society gets what they need, and it's a fundamentally different approach. Applying that to the situation that we're in. So the first problem is underlying is energy. Now, what the Bible would say is if energy prices are high when the costs haven't actually increased, that is illegal almost. It's a cartel. Yet for some reason, nobody's talking about this.
So I mean, I'd be very interested to see the detail on how the Civic Trust could work. Because I agree with the principle that, particularly in utilities, there's a degree to which these are they're natural monopolies, and they should be, as in fact all business ultimately should be. It's particularly public businesses. Their purpose should be the public benefit, and businesses get all sorts of benefits in law. They get protection, they get tax breaks because they are of benefit to the public. And if they're not doing that, we have a problem. So I do think we need to remind ourselves of what a business exists to do, which is to serve the public. How you structure the ownership of that business and how you ensure the proper performance of their duties is another question. And I think there is a big anxiety around monopoly, and the threat of the model that these guys are describing is that you're just creating local monopolies that, okay, to a degree reflect the reality of the monopoly of the supply, for instance, water, and to a less degree energy, or the multiple sources of energy. How you ensure that you actually have good performance, you don't get another threat, which is a sort of crony profiteering by the representatives of the community, how those are themselves chosen and held to account, how you ensure the investment that currently derives from the private market, how you ensure the inflow of talent and innovation that you get from competition.
Let me say, it's critical that there is competition. We are competitive beings, but the competition should be for the common good, not for me. So what we're talking about is civic trust in different areas that actually do the same thing, but in different ways, and do compete, but not from the shareholders. The trouble is, if you're not aligned, if I'm only interested in myself and the shareholders, and you're interested in society, how are we going to work together? There's fundamentally misalignments. You do actually need everybody to be aligned.
I think actually there is a good example we could draw on, which is you've been involved in a pilot project in Grimsby. So you have already tried to implement some of this vision. Can you tell us how that worked?
Yeah, so this is very linked to actually what Danny was saying earlier. So it's building a community organisation. So Grimsby is an abandoned place, and it has very, very poor state institutions and very, very little private investment. It's the land that time forgot. And so the idea, is it possible to renew a town like that? And the only basis of renewal is to build the relationships among the people of the town who are very fragmented, very distrustful. I mean, that distrust is central. And the idea is that you build as wide as you can a civic organisation, a community organisation that represents the interests of the town. And the idea would be, Danny, that over time, as we develop these ideas, try to engage with private investment, try to engage with state investment through levelling up, so that there's actually investment going into the town, but who holds it accountable? That's the crucial thing. So the whole point of this community organisation is to hold the different institutions of the state and the market accountable so that the people actually benefit. That's the rough idea.
Can I just add to that? You're worried about monopolies. We're talking about letting go. The key, this is what the state don't understand. You're creating local self-managing teams with individuals within those teams actually making decisions without being effectively controlled from the centre. So you would create a governance structure which allows for distributed decision-making by individuals within self-managing teams. If the governance structure is right, you're not going to get monopolies. You're going to get local teams that are competing for the common good. So the key is to get the governance structure right.
So let's break this down, okay? So we're in Grimsby. One of the local industries there is fishing. Yeah. What does this look like for a fisherman in Grimsby? How does it change?
So the fishing is dead. There's no more fishing. That's a byproduct. It's a long story, but that was the common market, the EU, and it.
The fish is still there.
The fish are still there, but there's no boats going out, and so there's very nasty sort of fish processing plants is what goes on. But what they have, I mean, now this is the thing. What they have is all the seaweed and the deep sea. These can all generate energy, new ecological plastics. So there needs to be investment in the town for these new technologies that are essentially green.
There's a
huge. That is certainly going on.
So who
Let me just build on
takes
that,
that?
Morris. The point is, you talk about the fish. The fish is still there. We kind of say that we're skipping it. It's still there, and the fish should be there for the people that. So I'm not sure why we simply reject all the fish because
Monetising the sea in whatever way. Who takes the decision to monetize the sea, and who brings the investment in to make that happen?
Okay, so it's got to be a combination of two forces. The first is a genuine private sector investment. That has to be, and Philip and I are working to see if that's possible. But there's also got to be a state commitment, so a partnership there. But then once that investment goes in, what's crucial is that there's an active participation of the people of Grimsby in how this works, right? So you could say that 45-79 was the apotheosis of the state, and then after 79, apologies, Danny, was the apotheosis of the market and the individual. This is the legacy that we're dealing with. So this is to see if there could be a genuine common good between market, state, and civil society.
So I visited Grimsby, Morris organised it, and we met Billy, a wonderful guy who is a local, who cares for other people. And he arranged a meeting with 15 or 20 locals. And there was a vicar there who said, Philip, whatever you do, don't allow the suits to come down and tell us what to do. They want the space, we've got to let go of them. They've got the initiative, they've got the ideas. We have to facilitate to enable them to thrive, but without telling them what to do. And they're so used to suits coming along and telling them, this is the way you're going to do it. And Billy and the people there, they've got ideas. We just need to help them to achieve what they need to achieve.
So on this civic trust, there's a housing trust that, how to renew derelict properties in Grimsby by the people. It's their responsibility. They have obligations to keep the houses well. But in return, they get the transfer of the freehold title to the civic trust. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yes.
do you see how but they have obligations. It's not just here you go, there's your freehold. They have to keep the garden, they have to maintain the house. And then they have a decent place to live.
That's the covenantal relationship.
That's the covenant. So that will give you some idea. But another way of looking at it, I don't know what you think, Danny, that I've been working with is the incentives. So at the moment you could say there's incentives to vice, incentives to career, to maximisation of profit, to individual. But if you have incentives to virtue, that if you invest in the long term, you get tax relief. If you stay in the area, you're rewarded for that. If you include the local people in your boards, it makes your business more profitable. These are things that we're thinking about. So incentives to vice, incentives to virtue is another way of conceptualising the covenant, that if you keep your covenant, you are rewarded.
Yes, communally. Danny, what sort of cut through is this idea getting in the Tory party?
Not much. Not much. But let me try and frame it in conservative terms, because I think the way Morris has spoken would cause a lot of my colleagues to look very askance. And yet, I think that the essential ideas here are compatible and in fact very conservative. Morris admits he's a conservative, really.
Well, much too conservative.
For the Labour Party, that's true. So, what are we trying to achieve here? There was an idea, and I do, in a sense, blame the Thatcher revolution for a mistake that was perpetuated by the Blair government. The assumption being that the way that industrialisation had happened in the first place, which was by the pretty organic meeting of capital and labour, helped by government, but really it was a natural process by which the labour flowed into the industrial centres and the capital flowed there too, and they between them did these deals to create factories and grow the industrial economy. The assumption was that as thanks to globalization and automation, these industrial centres diminished in prosperity, the same thing would happen. Capital would then flow back into these places because the land was cheap, the labour was cheap. The surplus labour that was no longer required for the factories would flow out and get on its bike and go and find jobs elsewhere.
In West London.
And neither of those things happened. To a certain degree they have, and we have pumped up London and the southeast, but capital and labour are attracted here. Actually, the towns of places like Grimsby, towns of the north and the Midlands, they're quite sticky. People are attached to them. They don't flow off and get on their bike and go and get elsewhere. And capital doesn't flow into them either in the way that it used to, because capital wants quick returns, and it's not prepared to invest in, derelict buildings and low-skilled populations. So the model that created the Industrial Revolution has not helped with deindustrialization. It's not helped with the new industrial revolution that we need to create now. So we need to be, I think, more deliberate about how we engineer that, which is why I support the notion of industrial strategy and industrial policy. But where I am a strong conservative, and I don't think these guys would necessarily disagree with it either, is the objective, the kind of society that we want to achieve is one that I think Thatcherites and conservatives would really resonate with, which is where the state is much smaller, the tax burden is smaller, the activities of central government are significantly less, because we have a stronger society, we have more genuine entrepreneurial businesses that are creating jobs and wealth across the UK, not just in the finance centres in the southeast. And frankly, we reduce the state to a decent proportion, the central state to a decent proportion of the economy. The challenge to my side is how come after 30 years of deregulation and a finance-driven economy, the state is bigger than ever. And the answer to that is because we're not creating the sort of economy that we need, which is one that is genuinely entrepreneurial, genuinely trusts people, a genuine free market, not a oligopoly and a cartel economy, in which people are genuinely trusted and liberated. And lastly, I'll just end with this point. So much of the red tape and so much the size of government is compliance, and it empowers a part of the private sector which we could do without, frankly, which is the enormous compliance industry, legal and regulatory. Mm-hmm. We could reduce the burdens on business. We could reduce government significantly. We could reduce the amount of the cost of compliance, which is so enormous. Cut a lot of red tape and regulation if we had kind of honouring relationships and a politics that is genuinely built on trust and virtue, where people are accountable for their actions directly, not through some legal compliance industry.
Can I just deal with the role of the state? In particular, we had the autumn statement. I want people to recognise there is a real alternative. We almost are robotic. We've got a set of rules that we have to follow. There are alternatives. So the way I see it, we start with the energy crisis. This is effectively being led by gas extracting companies that are actually overcharging. It's straight cartel, it's market abuse. Yet we seem to be convinced that we've got to let them have the money. So let's not address the root cause, which is a failure of capitalism, a failure of people to actually look after the interests of the people they're supposed to. That the energy, the gas is actually our gas. Why is it being used for the shareholders? The money.
I think we've addressed that because we've said mutually owned assets should be owned mutually.
No, what I'm trying to say, I want to be clear, there's three things. I want to make it clear how it works with a different outcome. So one, you actually deal with the root cause, which is you stop these energy companies overcharging. You don't give money back to the people via rebates. You actually stop it at root cause, which is a different solution. That means
so you set the price.
You set the price, which is what the state should. It's a cartel. Number two, you then say, 1 minute, okay, inflation is caused by this gas. Therefore, let's go and increase interest rates, which eats into the pockets of the people who are suffering because of the actual energy. That's just completely crazy. So you're eating more money from their take-home pay. And where's the money going? It's going into the banks as interest, and that's extra profit for other shareholders. So again, we've got to deal with that problem. Interest rates should go back to zero. They shouldn't be where they are. They've got to go back to zero. And the third thing is now we're saying in the budget, we've got to not only make them pay extra energy costs, not only increase their interest rates and pay more money for either their rent or for their mortgages, we're saying we're going to increase the tax on them as well. So we're hitting them again. So wherever you go, you say we need to actually take away from the people who can't put food on the table and give it to people that have got plenty. So what I'm saying is there is a different answer here, but it's about a different story. We've got to start thinking about meeting people's needs and dealing with the root cause, which is abuse by the market, and then making sure that money gets to where it needs to get, which ties into the regional banks. If we start looking at the banking system, fractional reserve banking is crazy, where that money is created by the banks for their own interests. What we're saying is use the money to look after the poor people, because that's where it's needed. So there's a different solution here.
Yeah. Maurice, how would you stop runaway inflation and lower interest rates?
Well, very much as Philip is actually saying, is that root causes of the inflation are the control of the money supply by private banks, is one aspect. The inability to, I mean, our energy costs haven't really risen, and yet because global market prices have risen, the prices, I mean, so we've got to talk about the national interest there. But I just want to, I mean, this is getting really interesting, Danny. I just want to dispute slightly your innocent view of industrialisation. I mean, what happened was the state acted to do two things. And the first thing it did was it enforced enclosures and freehold title over customary practice. That led to enclosures and the dispossession of the entire English peasantry, who were forced to go to the industrial towns and to work in slave conditions, I mean, in appalling conditions. That's the root of the labour movement, was to try to organise those people. And the first thing they did was organise the burial society so they wouldn't have a pauper's grave. So that, and the second thing that the state did was it abolished all apprenticeship laws for anybody except doctors, lawyers, accountants and dentists. So the working class were effectively, they had their status removed. So that led to a huge exploitation of labour. I mean, this is really fundamental to that industrialisation story. So that was a story of dispossession. And the other story that happened, which is not the innocent story about Thatcherism, is the transfer of the assets to China. And China has no unions, has no status for labour, has no democracy, has no liberty. So what capitalism found was a communist state that was perfect for capitalism: maximum exploitation of labour, maximisation of returns, no disruption of the production process. I'm just saying all of these things go together. So what I'm saying is the state was actively involved in the creation of this form of capitalism, and the state does have to be actively involved. But where we share the vision is the reason you've got your paradox of Thatcher, that there's greater privatisation and there's greater free markets and greater state spending, is that people don't take care of each other. Social care, because of the dissolution of the social bonds. So for me, social care is a family issue. So how do you strengthen families to support intergenerationally? That links up to the covenant stuff. Danny, I'm only just beginning.
Yeah, I feel like we could go on a long time here.
It's an important conversation.
But I think you're fundamentally agreeing on a few things, actually.
A lot of things.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously there's the experience in Grimsby. Danny, what would you do? I mean, you devises your constituency. If you had free reign right now, if the state said, okay, you could set up a pilot project, you can get this covenant thing working, what would you do?
Well, thanks. I mean, that would be tremendous. And actually, the Levelling Up Bill and the white paper that preceded it do create the opportunities for more localism and particularly the notion of a community covenant, which is in there in the white paper as an aspiration that the government is inviting communities to develop proposals for how they would organise the social settlement, the public service settlement in a place. So what I would like to see, and I mean, here we are, we're actually doing this filming in White City, where I've done a lot of work here in West London. This is the old BBC centre, but outside the window is the White City estate. And what you've got there is a classic urban 20th century housing estate, 1930s buildings, successive waves of immigration, and successive efforts by government and civil society to create institutions that support the community, more and less successful. But what you haven't got is a coherent community in which people have a genuine sense of belonging to a set of institutions. They might have a sense of belonging to the location and to the sort of place of White City, although there's been so much churn that people don't really have that enough. What I did here before I was an MP was establish an institution that tried to bring together civil society, local government and local business to support children and young people, and to be a sort of anchor or a hub for the different institutions which between them affected the lives of children and families, but without any proper coordination between them. So we do need these sort of hub, and I think that's what you guys are talking about in Grimsby, a sort of institution for institutions. The great thing about Wiltshire is that it doesn't have the rapid turnover of population. There's a genuine sense of belonging in place there. And you have, therefore, the conditions are really good for creating a much more rooted civil society-led social settlement. So what I would like to see more of, and Maurice mentioned social care, it's the big one. 60% of our local council's budget goes on adult social care, including working age people. And that budget, the council does it all it can, and yet there's never enough. And people are really struggling. And they're struggling because the model is set up, as Maurice intimated, whereby the state undertakes responsibility for looking after the elderly or the working age disabled, and it might or might not give the families a bit of help to do so. It doesn't give enough, in my view. And what we need to be doing is saying, fundamentally, we need to be helping families to look after their elderly and their disabled adults. And so, in a simple example of that is, at the moment, you can get more money from the government if you put your elderly parent into a care home, rather than looking after them in your own home. And often it's very difficult to look after your parent in your own home for practical reasons, but actually that's where the effort should be going, to support families to do what families want to do in most cases, rather than saying we are going to take care of them by putting them into a pretty, it might be good or bad, but it's going to be pretty impersonal institution somewhere away from the home where they might or might not get a visit once a week.
Can I build on what Danny said? Tiffanie said to me, can this happen in the real world? Now, I'm a practical pragmatist. I'm a businessman. I've fortunately been able to make things happen. The answer is agile. This is business learned this a long time ago. You don't go into what we call a waterfall model where we try to do everything at the same time. We've got to build a model society in an area with the locality to show how it's done. By example, Grimsby could be that area. We work with Billy. Morris is doing some community organising within Grimsby. If we can show that this can actually work, and this is how you revitalise, how you bring a place back to, then people start to, wow, there's a solution here. We've got some hope.
Yeah, and we've got funding now for Levelling Up.
That's important, Tiffanie. I just want to come in just to, in a different way to Danny. I found a genuine resonance within your party about a lot of this stuff. And I do think that the Levelling Up initiative is the first time since 1964 that the state has even intimated that there was a purpose for an industrial strategy, recognised the geographical inequalities, talked about institutions. So I think it's more resonant than perhaps you're suggesting there. But this brings right back to the beginning of our conversation about this social care thing, about covenant. So you have obligations to your parents and you have obligations to your children, and they don't disappear if you don't want them. This is the tough part of it. And to tap into support, though, the extended family, it doesn't need to be the nuclear family, in supporting the intergenerational aspect. So in the end, the biggest problem, social care, is in fact the biggest challenge for us to actually make these ideas operational, I think. It just brings clarity to that.
Thank you. Do we have any questions now from the audience? Okay, thank you very much. So how can business be more, this is actually, I was going to go ask you this, Philip. I get it when it comes to assets that we all publicly own, like energy and water and transport, but how can business be more motivated towards purpose, not profit? How do you get like a recruitment business to recognise its overall responsibility to the community rather than just making the C-suite richer?
And they've got to recognise that the purpose is not only to look after the interests of the shareholder, it's to look after the interests of people, place and planet. And the whole business sector, it's all about the shareholder, which is crazy. It's just a bizarre concept. So we have to start educating people to think about each other, to think about the planet. The planet itself hasn't got a voice. The energy companies that are destroying the economy at the moment also are destroying the planet, but no one's actually challenging this. So we have to start to re-energize business, to start re-looking at the purpose of business. What's it about? To accumulate £100 billion, what's that for? It's a few bits on a computer. It's not real, but changing people's lives is real. And we have to start getting them focused on real problems that need to be solved to meet the needs of people and place and planet.
Okay, Morris, how would you break the power of the markets to allow that to happen?
Well, it's a complicated thing. So the thing is, there's got to be a price system. I support all of that, and what Danny's talking about, small businesses, entrepreneurs. However, what the problem is deep down with the particular form of the society we have is that all the incentives are towards the highest possible return at the greatest possible speed, irrespective of the consequences. So you've got to get to the fundamental bit of the covenant, which is that human beings and nature, were not created by the market. They're a sacred inheritance. Human beings need to be treated with dignity and respect. It's so fundamental, and that nature is not just a commodity to be exploited. but it's an inheritance to be nurtured and preserved. So these are the fundamental things where law is, where legislation is absolutely required, you know, and that's the first aspect, is that we are citizens. I mean, we're subjects of the Crown, but that's even better, is that we are part of a human institution that requires negotiation and reason. And then in relation to that, so that's the first thing.
And a natural institution in relation to the environment.
That's absolutely right. So just to get the fundamental assumption right, human beings and nature are not commodities, and money is also not straightforwardly. It's created by the state as a token of exchange, and it's, you know, it's the blood that pumps through the.
Yeah. That's a big change, because if you think about money as blood, it changes the whole framework for
And
making
it has
decisions.
to go everywhere to
It's
make
got to
the
meet
body
everyone's.
work.
If you think about the body, it's a beautiful system. The blood ensures that every bone, every muscle, every tendon gets what it needs by mutual exchange, even with environment. So we inhale oxygen, which is produced by the trees. It then gets into the blood. It gets into the blood, and then the energy is created, and then it takes carbon dioxide back out through the lungs to the environment. So we are actually through the blood, are looking after the environment, and the environment's looking after us. It's a mutual exchange.
Yeah, and to go back to this is just, you know, I use a lot, Danny, the idea of the body politic rather than civil society, by the way. There's a whole structure of civic institutions below the level of the state that have atrophied. So what you have is you've got the individual, then you've got the collective, and society disintegrates. But these institutions, schools, hospitals, and all this civic need to be renewed and replenished. So this body politic requires the blood for the body, but these institutions, the liver, the kidneys, the heart, you know, these need to be renewed, not just
Jumping in. So I get that, and I like that metaphor too, and I share it. I would just point out though that part of an ecosystem or body is everything plays its part. It's not just that it's being served by the blood; it has a role to play in the body.
Yes.
And I take your point about nature and people not being commodities. And they shouldn't be sort of bought and sold as if they're sort of passive objects that have no value of their own, except what value other people put on them. But we must almost also remember that to a certain degree we have function and use that has a value to other people, and so it is appropriate, for instance, I think, to treat the natural world as a source of value for us. I mean, very obviously it is. Without it, we die. But I'm just concerned about this developing narrative here could get a bit into a sort of, I think, rather pagan idea that the created order, that the natural world has some sort of quality above and beyond the uses to which human beings can put it to. And actually, you know, it was given to us to cultivate, and the great value of the land, and indeed of the sea, is the fruit that it produces. And I am concerned, particularly it's relevant to the current debates we're having around environmental management and the agricultural bill that we just passed last year, an environment bill, which is going to pay farmers to look after the land and to sustain the health of the soil and the water, which is really important because the commodified agricultural economy that we had hitherto trashed the land and the soil. But we must not forget that the purpose of the land in England is to produce food for people to eat. That is its primary purpose. It's also there to look beautiful and sustain the biodiversity and the butterflies and so on. But it has a function, and the function is to produce food for us. I don't think we should shy away from that. And so I'm very concerned about a narrative that will. I mean, I'm all for rewilding certain parts and for reintroducing, you know. But the danger is that we say let's create a national park, and then produce our food in factories.
It has to be.
So
do not fear. That's not the. That's not the way.
That's not which is it's a two-way relationship.
That's right. That's right. And we are here to be used, including human beings to be used as well, not as slaves, but we of the virtue of a human being is to be useful. So we should also treat each other as, in a sense, as commodities, but not as neutral commodities that are for other people's exploitation.
That's important, Danny. We need to make sure that the welfare state, which simply gives people money, isn't the ideal solution. We've got to get everybody energized, everybody contributing, all hands on deck, doing something that we need. Because it's demeaning to just be given a hand up for doing nothing. It's not covenantal. There's no relation. What's big is we've got to move from a mechanical metaphor where it's rules and principles and everything's predetermined, paganistic, to a humanistic concept where we're working together to meet each other's needs. And they're not rigid rules, inflation, interest rates, increased taxation, reduce costs. No, get the money into the hands of the people that need it to put food on the table. It's much simpler.
I love the idea of all of this. I love this idea of virtue and appealing to that. But it seems to me that you need to shift a fundamental measure of success in society, which is, and I've heard you talk about this, Philip, that you're not measured by the size of your bank account or the idea that you might want a bigger house or a car or something, but you're measured by the strength and number of your relationships. Now, that seems to be a huge shift in this post-consumer society. So how do we tackle that?
Well, we also, you're right to identify the great challenge here. I mean, and I'm also concerned, as I think these guys will be too, but certainly as a conservative, with distrust of power and distrust to the central state, of the danger of this language being basically a sneaky way to empower a new elite that will basically decide what value is, set prices, and organise everything according to its wisdom. The great value of the individualised free market in principle, and perhaps to some degree, is that it empowers the individual and it protects the individual from abuse. In practice, as we know, often that doesn't work. So we need to have a system that does not, under the guise of relational economics and our obligations to each other and to nature and to future generations and all of this very nice language, simply create a system in which a new elite, a new set of bureaucrats are ordering everybody around, and will do so incredibly inefficiently. I mean, they will be far worse and arbitrarily, and they'll be it'll be hopeless. It'll be a kind of Soviet. The original Soviet idea was one in which the central state would wither as well. They thought everything could be.
The Soviets were supposed to be local sources.
That's right. So let's be very careful not to create a sort of a new Soviet system. But you ask how to get there, and I think you're right, it's about our own values. And so this isn't going to come from above, it's going to come through a revival of frankly quite traditional moral culture in which we recognise, as we all do, pay lip service to, and to a certain degree in our own lives. We know we put our families first to a degree. We also let our families down and betray them and behave badly. But we do know fundamentally, most of us, that we live for our families, not for ourselves. The general culture sort of, again, pays lip service to that, and popular TV talks about it and so on, but really our model does not honour family life, it doesn't honour community life. So we need to have a new mindset, and I don't know how to do it. And we're all from kind of traditional religious backgrounds. We're probably not very good at articulating this in a way that's going to resonate. Well, yeah, I don't want to knock Ronaldo. He's probably a good family man. I don't know. Isn't it?
Yesterday.
But the key is letting go, allowing the space for people to thrive. And the state doesn't get it, and the market doesn't get it, but we get it as people of faith. It is about letting go, and that's how you avoid Marxist economics, where you start forcing people to behave. You've got to let them go. You've got to give them space. You have to support them. The leader's role is not to make decisions. The state, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister sit by themselves for a couple of weeks and put together a budget. What about everyone else? They've got to start listening to other people. So you have to empower people, and the leaders have to recognise it's a different role. It's modelling, it's giving them the power, not making decisions.
Yeah, just to acknowledge the great sage of Wiltshire, which was Roger Scruton, we used to talk about. Yeah. But also it's the fact that nobody thinks that they live in Medway or North Lincolnshire. There's a very arbitrary administrative map, and I think a return to the parish, to the counties, would be a very good place to start, about natural affections that people have for the places that they live, and finding a political and civic expression of that. So I've got this idea of the parish commune, a local parish meeting every fourth Sunday, probably in the church hall, where people make votes about housing, education, and the things that affect them there. So there's got to be a civic renewal, but also a political imagination that conforms to the way that people understand the world. I mean, that's quite conservative.
The individuals, you don't want to create votes whereby you have the vote should be indicative, but you've got to have accountability. Marxism said no private ownership. You need private ownership for accountability, but as a trustee, not as an owner. You need, otherwise, you're going to go back to a controlling system. So the key is to create accountability via citizen assemblies, whereby you get the voice for the community, but give people to do it themselves.
And what we learned from the financial crash was accountability was much too important to be left to accountants, who turned out to be completely corrupt, you know, in that crash.
I do worry how to do this without also, and the essential precondition to the sort of political model these guys are describing is a common culture. Because we all need to basically be talking the same language and have similar aspirations. And you know, the challenge in a fragmented society, and we have it here in West London particularly, but we have it in Wiltshire too, where you'd call a village meeting and you would get 20 different points of view, and they might or might not succeed through over time and through the relationships that they build in coming to a consensus or decision that the majority decision that the minority understand. But that is not going to happen quickly. And it's not going to happen without either a crisis to make it necessary, or you know, strong inducements delivered over time to make it attractive, and how to build those in ways that work. Because you know, frankly, we all live selfishly, and to change our own mindset to say, I'm going to go to the town hall, the village hall, and think about what's good for the village rather than what's good for me, is quite an ask.
Yeah.
You asked how you do it. It's interesting, Michael Gove was in education where he was successful, and now they're levelling up. Education is the key here. You could use the skills then, because we've got to re-educate, and that's the way people change from below. So it's not enforced by power, it's actually an educational
But
process.
that's a generation, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's also to Danny, interests, you know, and personal interests. If the parish commune actually deals with issues relating to housing, education, my experience is that people, for very self-interested reasons, do attend.
Well, I totally agree, and actually housing is a great one, because with the assumption that particularly rural villages are NIMBYs, if they don't want new developments, they want to keep people out. Actually, in Wiltshire, all of our villages need more housing because the schools are dying. There is, you know, not enough homes for people's children to live in. What they don't want is some external property developer coming in, gaming the system to plonk down 50 homes for incomers, you know, executive homes for wealthy people who are moving from the city. They want homes that are right for the community. And I actually do agree with Maurice. I think if you did create a structure in which planning and house building were much more locally controlled, we would actually get the new housing that we urgently need. Yeah. And where we didn't, there would be signs of a problem. If a place became NIMBYist, what's going on there? Well, how are the interests not aligned? Because actually everywhere needs housing.
Not to be afraid of self-interest. You know, that's the very motor that drives a discovery of a common.
Tiffany, can I just pick up on the point you made about the education being a generational way? It's not true. You can do it with the technology. We can speak to the whole world in an instant. We'd have to wait a generation. We can start getting groups of 10 people starting to talk about these ideas and spreading them around. It's not a generational way. It could be done very quickly because we have these techniques that we can do it now with technology and personal meetings. It's not a generational way.
Yes. And I also like what you said earlier about incentivizing as well, because that's something that can be done quite quickly and implemented. So we are, I'm afraid, out of time. I would like to end with a question for all of you. We're living in a time of, huge pressure on the individual and in society. What is the one message that you would like to give government right now to move this idea along? Maurice, can I start with you?
Trust the people. You know, don't hoard it all for yourself. You'll be bowed down by the responsibilities and impossibility of what you've got to do. Redistribute power and trust the decisions that people make.
Yes, well, I support this government, Conservative government. My message to them would be to achieve fiscal balance and to reduce the burden of taxation over the long term. We need to empower civil society or create a stronger body politic, stronger families and communities, because ultimately it's by reducing the demand on the acute public sector that we will ultimately achieve the Conservative dream of a smaller government.
Yeah, for me, it's rethinking what money's about. As fundamental as that, start to think about meeting people's needs and forget about this borrowing and reducing tax. It's about meeting people's needs, and that change of narrative can change the system.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. And if you would like to continue this discussion, as I'm sure that's opened up many avenues, then please contact Phillip Ullmann or Covenant Advisory directly through LinkedIn or on their websites.